Hi guys, welcome to Greek Mythology. I'm Robin. If you've never seen a webinar with me before, I see from some of our participants, I see a lot of familiar names of people who have learned about American history with me. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to talk about Greek mythology today, which I think some of you probably know a little bit about already, but we're just going to be talking a little bit about mythology and why it's important to study it and some words and terms that have to do with it. Okay, let me... Hi, Shayna. Hi, Lila. Hi, Paige. Hi, Katya. It's nice to see you guys again. I know I can't see you, but it's nice to have you join the webinar. Hi, April. Okay, so we're going to talk about Greek mythology. And what is Greek mythology? Now, you may already know something, like a little bit or a lot about it. It shows up in a lot of books and movies. There's a really good chance that you've read books influenced by Greek mythology. I'm sure a lot of you have probably read the Percy Jackson books, or seen a movie with Greek mythology in it. Hercules is a character from Greek mythology who's become a really popular movie character. And he fought Thor once in a Marvel comic book. So what is Greek mythology? So let's talk about the meaning or define the meaning of some of these words. So Greek means coming from or related to the country of Greece, which if you guys can see my background, which all of you should be able to, you can see my background today is the Acropolis, which is a very famous landmark in Greece. There was a temple to the Greek gods there, and I believe it's on a hill overlooking the city of Athens. Okay, so Greek means having to do with the country of Greece, and on a map of Europe, that is Greece right there. So you can see where the little red circle is. That is Greece on a map of Europe. So now mythology. So they're stories, which we call myths, of a group of people about their very early history. These stories often tried to explain the things that they observed or saw in nature. So every culture in the world throughout history has told stories. If you guys were part of my history webinars, you know that we talked about history as the story that we tell within our culture, within our family, our own country, that sort of explains the things that happened. And these stories were passed down from person to person long before anyone invented writing. It was the way that we passed history on to people before we were able to write it down. Sometimes these stories were told for fun, just like a fun, cool story to tell, but they were often used to educate young people or to keep track of the history of that group of people. Lila, I don't have a costume on. I did try to do some Greek-ish type braids, but yes, I will try to think more about a costume. I didn't want to come in like wrapped in a sheet today, so I thought that might be a little much. There was an author and historian. Her name was Edith Hamilton, and she wrote a very famous book called Mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes. And she explained another idea about mythology, besides just the stories that we would tell and the history. In this book, she said, myths are early science, the result of men's first trying to explain what they saw around them. In science, we make observations and we ask questions about the world around us. Why does something work that way? Why do things fall when they're dropped? Why do we have day and night? Then we try to come up with guesses or answers to those questions. When an ancient Greek saw an erupting volcano, they must have thought, I bet there's a giant blacksmith inside the mountain making armor and weapons, which if you guys are familiar with Greek mythology or have read any of the Percy Jackson's books, that's the god Hephaestus, and he was the blacksmith god. When the ancient Greeks saw a rainbow, they must have thought, I bet that light is a magical bridge for a goddess to come down to earth. The big difference between modern science and the ancient myths is that we today can test our guesses to see if they're accurate. The ancient Greeks had no way to find out if their explanations for the natural world were true. So they were just guesses or ideas of why something happened the way it happened, or why they maybe experienced something like an earthquake or a volcano eruption, a snowstorm, the seasons, you know, all those different things that they were experiencing. But besides just trying to take guesses and figure out why things were happening the way they were, these stories about the natural world, they were creative, they were fun, and they were important to the culture of ancient Greece. And so they passed from person to person over hundreds and then thousands of years. You know, no one knows who told the first myths. There's not like a timeline of history where it was like, at this exact time, this guy told the very first story. But we think we know some of the first people that wrote these myths down. There's two very famous, long, ancient poems called the Iliad and the Odyssey. And they were written by a man named Homer. These are the story. The Iliad comes from the word Ilios, which is an ancient Greek word for the city we now call Troy. And Troy was the location of a long famous war called the Trojan War. So the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War and the things that came before it and all the things that came in the middle of it, and then a little bit about what came at the end of it. Katya, yes, if a Greek person was in an earthquake, it is true they probably would think that the gods were angry. A lot of things like thunder and lightning, if you're familiar with Greek mythology or Percy Jackson, you know that is a way that Zeus, the main big boss god of the Greek gods, would show that he either liked something or that he didn't like something. So the ancient Greeks knew a lot about this Trojan War, and they loved to hear stories told about it. Historians think that a lot of the stories were probably written down about the Trojan War, but very few have survived to modern day. So they either got lost or they're just not recorded in some way. But the Iliad is one of those few that have survived. And, you know, students today still read the Iliad and still read the Odyssey. Obviously, I mean, maybe some of them read them in Greek, but many students read them in English. I teach a class where students read the Odyssey and they read it in English and learn all about it. The Odyssey is actually the second part of this same story, and it's about a man trying to get home after the Trojan War and all of the adventures and misadventures that he goes through. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are famous because they're some of the earliest surviving sources. Some people believe they're the first sources of our information about the ancient Greek gods and goddesses and stories about the Greek heroes. So talking about what happened, there's so much that happens in both of these poems, and it's a huge topic, which we'll probably cover another day. But you should know, like I said before, you know, there's such great stories that people still read them today, thousands of years after they were first written down. And there's lots of lessons in those stories, especially the Odyssey, that have to do with things that we are still interested in today, like leadership and luck and, you know, doing the right thing. And they're just these really great, they're still great lessons that even today, not in ancient Greece, that we can take from them. Besides, it's also kind of cool to read something that was written thousands and thousands of years ago, I think, at least. So no one knows for certain if Homer was a real person or if it was really a group of people who all contributed to the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like I talked about before it was written down, it was passed by from person to person. And one of the things that would happen is there were people who were called bards, and their job was to tell these stories. Sometimes they would sing these stories, and they would travel around Greece and around that area telling these stories for entertainment. And many people believe that Homer was one of those men. And if he was one person, that then he wrote it down. If Homer was a real person, though, he might have looked like this. Gavin, yes, Homer was he's considered to be a poet, to answer your question about whether he was a writer or a poet. The stories told by Homer were read for entertainment because they were fun and fascinating and exciting. But they were also used in ancient schools to teach children. These stories were studied in ancient times and then during a period of history known as the Renaissance and up to modern day. For those of you that are not familiar with that term, the Renaissance was a time around 1400, so about 620 years ago, where people in Europe became really interested in studying about ancient Greece and ancient Rome and their ideas, their stories, their way of life. And they began to study those different philosophies so that they could make their own life better. And so that was another time and period where they were were very interested in that. So why do we study Greek mythology today? There's a lot of really good reasons for it. I mean, besides just the entertainment factor of it. Some people would argue that our most popular modern stories are based on Greek mythology. You know, Superman is based on Zeus. Aquaman is based on Poseidon, the king of the lord of the sea. Hermes, who was the messenger god and the god of a bunch of other different things, travelers, thieves, merchants, people who sold things, was like the Flash. He also was really fast, and he was the guy who delivered all the messages for the gods. And if you understand the origins of the stories you love, it can help you understand and enjoy those stories even more. So Greek mythology can also teach us valuable lessons about the past, or even teach us lessons about ourselves. So over the next few weeks, we'll be studying and discussing several Greek myths. So let's see how much we can learn and how much fun that we can have in the process. Hold on just 1 second, guys. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I hope you can hear me now. I would be interested, those were all the slides I had, but I would be interested in finding out if you guys had any questions about Greek mythology, or if there were any particular stories or things about Greek mythology that you would be interested in learning more about. So let's see, so does anybody have any questions? Nope, I think, am I unfrozen now? I should be unfrozen. Okay, good. Nim and Nish, thank you. Hercules, good. We will definitely talk about Hercules. And the different stories, good. That's another one. Gavin, good about Hermes. I do think you're right. I think Hermes did deliver some souls of the dead people to the afterlife. All of the gods. Okay, good. How many of you guys have read the Percy Jackson books? Have a lot of you read them? Are you familiar? You know, Aries. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, good. Aries, that's great. Aries was the god of war. So he was a big, exciting fellow who, as you can imagine, if he was the god of war, had a pretty bad temper and liked to fight people. Great. Gemma, how the Greeks came up with the idea of the gods, that would be a great thing to talk about. Gavin, you've read the whole series and watched all the movies. Okay, well, if I have any questions about Greek mythology, I may ask you. Okay, good. Great. Well, what I can start with, I have a couple minutes more. We're going to end in about 10 minutes, okay? But, oh, Mackenzie and Denali ask, how do you spell the name of the god of war? Aries, A-R-E-S, Aries. It looks like ours, but it's actually Aries, the way that it's pronounced. Gavin, who's my favorite god? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have one. I really like actually, there is a goddess who is her name is Hestia, and she is responsible for keeping the fire burning all the time on Mount Olympus where the gods lived. And she had a little chair where she sat in there, and she is the goddess of hearth, so like a fireplace and home, and family, and she has always been one of my very favorite. She doesn't get into the same trouble as the rest of the Greek gods because she tends to stay home, and she tends to just take care of that space. Yes, definitely, Lila, we can definitely study about Venus, or Aphrodite as she's known in Greek mythology, which is the goddess of love. Oh, Katya, what a great question. What god does Wonder Woman represent? Okay, let me think about that. I think that I would say that she represents Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom. and she's like, she knows what the right thing to do is. She's very smart in battle. She thinks things through, and those are all things which Athena would do as well. That is a great question. Aubrey, okay, the god of love. Wonderful. Well, great, good. Those give me some really great ideas, guys. Let me know sort of what you're interested in knowing about. And then we will just, you know, then we will learn some more about Greek myths, and we'll learn more about the stories. You know, sort of Greek myths start sort of in the beginning, where there is the earth and there is the sky, and the earth and the sky fall in love. You know, the earth being Gaia, or Gia, I think is how they say her name sometimes, who is Mother Earth, and Uranus, who is the sky and the universe. And that was really, when we talk about Greek mythology, the beginning of people. And well, great, good. Interested, Gavin, in how the Greeks thought about the gods, because maybe they had a lot of time. Wonderful. And the different stories, probably what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the basis of the Greek gods, how they sort of came up with them, a little bit of the history of them, and then probably dive into talking about specific stories. Mostly because the stories are what I think is the most interesting and useful, and the things which, you know, which are lessons from different stories that we can use today. Okay, good. The mountain, great. Mackenzie and Denali, different mountains, volcanoes, and things like that. So we will, the next time that I'll be doing this webinar will be on Thursday, and we will have, and then we'll get into talking more about the Greek myths, the Greek gods, how they came up with the different stories, and what those stories have to do with you. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. I know it was a little bit shorter than we planned, but I'm glad that you could be here and we could start off on our study of Greek mythology. Okay, thank you guys.